Welcome to the Alexander Hill podcast, where we dive deep into personal transformation, practical wisdom, and the stories of those on their journeys. Thanks for coming along for the ride. Let's get right to it. Today we have Andrew Ecker. Not only is Andrew a friend of mine, but he is a spiritual mentor and somebody I met a number of years ago through the Man Tribe. And Andrew was present at one of our very first retreats, one of our largest retreats and gatherings. I look up to this man. He's a force. He is a powerful force and influencer, coach, and spiritual teacher. So I just want to welcome him here today. Welcome, Andrew.
Oh, thank you. I want to acknowledge you, Alex, and just the growth that I've seen in you and your ability to really create culture with Man Tribe, and also, within your own personal space, how you have led your family and been the man that I know you to be. I'd like to introduce myself, first of all, in the ancestral language and then in the contemporary, as this is a powerful practice that I have in my life, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So dogate Andrew Ecker Yinishe, Adon ne Nishinigi Inde Nishe, Irish Bashachin, Inde Dashache, German Dashanali, Akote go Tishli Portland, Oregon Inisha, Shema Kathy Lindsey Woye, Shiza Del Ecker Wole. So I am Andrew Ecker, my mother Kathy Lindsey, my father Dale Ecker, my mother's mother Elva Gallegos, Apache woman from New Mexico, my father's mother Evelyn Beatty, Irish woman from Pennsylvania, my mother's father Leroy Lindsey, Apache man from Arkansas, and my father's father Wayne Ecker, German Algonquin from Pennsylvania. I have a daughter Bailey, a son Peyton, a beautiful beloved fiance Monica. I was incarnated into this body in the land of the Multnomah, the Clackamas, and the Willamette, next to a beautiful river in Portland, Oregon, right at the base of Mount Hood and all the beautiful Cascade Mountains. And I reside now in the Valley of the Sun, they call it, is the land of the Akmal Atam, the Pipash Maricopa Inde people here in Phoenix, Arizona. So I'm so grateful to be here with you and share some insights into self-identity, emotional intelligence, and relational spirituality, how this applies to your mission of really creating a culture that betters all of us, that gives us authenticity, vulnerability, intimacy in our relationships. And especially right now with the climate that we're currently in, we're seeing such a progression in mental health issues. And really, one of the things that comes forward in my heart right now is the fact that, we have yet to give men a safe space to really, especially, within the structure of, the quote unquote American experience, to give men an opportunity to really look at, the generational trauma of years of warfare. We as a country have been sending our young men to war for hundreds of years, literally back to the Revolutionary War, and then of course the American Indian War, and now the never-ending war in the Middle East. And I feel that threat to our existence, it has really come forward in a lot of strange ways. We have this generational trauma inside of us as men, and it's challenging for us to even pinpoint, it doesn't feel right. Something just doesn't feel like it's, that there's balance in my life. And, unfortunately, men are utilizing violence as an expression of that trauma. And we're witnessing that. We're witnessing, the mass shootings. We're witnessing the domestic violence, all of the different things that are going on. And I just want to give, the men that are listening to this, and also the ladies that are listening to this, that they have support here. Man Tribe is a safe space for you. It's a safe space for you to come to and to listen to Alex and to listen to all the great people that he brings on to this space, and to just really allow for yourself to be in a witness of what energies are coming forward. There are ways that we can deal with this generational trauma, generational addiction, even in my case, and we'll get into a little bit of my story, hopefully, as we go. But generational incarceration, these are things that we're really dealing with in our lives, that yet we don't know necessarily how to language it. We don't know how to experience the trauma in a way that's safe. So that definitely comes forward, especially in the height of, a massacre of Asian women that we just witnessed. A person who was a self-described sex addict that went in and shot these women in these massage parlors. And I just think to myself, gosh, there's just so much for us to unpack, and especially, those of us that are called to this place of leadership in our lives. So that's what comes forward for me, Alex. I know that we kind of came on here with just an opportunity to explore and to talk, and I feel really passionate about that conversation right now,
Mm.
inside of my heart. So I don't, I want to give that over to you, and just really kind of see what comes forward in your space.
Yeah, well, what stood out for me, Andrew, was safe space, and the way that you introduced yourself was safe space, and sort of this individual relationship to safe space. And I felt that, and
Mm.
I want to get into that, first and foremost, and then we can talk about, how you got into these ways and how you learned this sacredness. But really, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the introduction you just gave, and how you came to know that introduction.
Growing up, I think in our contemporary culture, there's very few individuals that don't come to a place of asking, well, who am I? I mean, the rise of the genetic industry, ancestry.com, 23andMe, all of these companies have made literally millions, possibly billions of dollars off the fact that we as American people don't know who we are, many of us. And that conversation, I feel the older we get, especially those of us that are parents, it comes forward in a way that's really powerful. And for me, that exploration of self identity, there were times when, as a younger man, where I didn't want to associate with my parents at all. I didn't want to even associate with my grandparents at all. It was all resentment and even hatred, and I can say that, that resentment and hatred led me to a lot of anger and dysfunction. It led me to a lot of destruction in my life. And being the person that I am today, when I introduce myself as my mom and my dad and my grandmas and grandpas, I'm accessing a key touch point into ancient earth-based wisdom. Many communities around the world, before the confusion of the illusion came in and we started teaching children, what are you going to be when you grow up, rather than fortifying who they are, right? The questions are more important than the answers. When you feed a child that whole kind of question line, guess what happens to their mind? They start to believe that they're not enough already. In indigenous communities throughout the world, which I was taught from an early age that I'm Apache, by my father, my grandfather, my relatives. And inside of that container of being Native American, it was like, well, what does that mean? I came home from school one day after a bunch of kids, called me a spick and a Mexican, when I was living in rural Arkansas, and asked me, what I was, because, I obviously didn't look like they did. And I remember standing there in front of them and saying, well, my grandma spoke Spanish, but I've never been to Mexico. I mean, I was literally like bewildered. And when I came home from school, my grandfather, who had already, pretty much drank himself into a stupor from behind a bottle of liquor, looked at me and said, I told you to tell them you're a renegade Apache Indian. This is what came through my mind. This is how I was taught who I was. And this same grandfather was a Vietnam War veteran, used to wake me up in the middle of the night, and torture me as a little boy because he wanted me to be a warrior. He would say things like, oh, if the Viet Cong came into the camp, if they came into our house today, they would do this to you and you need to be ready. And I grew up in that heightened state of fear. Not only was my grandfather in addiction, but my mom suffered from intravenous addiction. She died of a cocaine overdose. My father died of cirrhosis of the liver, caused by hepatitis C because of his heroin addiction, and all kinds of trauma around me. I mean, I'm being left at drug houses. I've dealt with sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect, left at the park while my mom went to the dope house, not even knowing when she was going to come back. I mean, just things like this that I've had to unpack in my life today as a grown man, and wanting to show up with an authenticity, a vulnerability, an intimate expression of self-identity. So when you ask about how I came to that technology of understanding myself, there was a lot there. I was unpacking the inheritance of generational trauma, not only, as an indigenous person. Many of us have never really come to grips with the fact that we live in a country that for many years, I mean, the longest lasting war in American history is, again, here, the American Indian War. It's not the war in Afghanistan. It's not the war in Iraq. The American Indian War lasted for hundreds of years. And now we're safe enough to explore those feelings. But yet for many of us, right, it's very challenging. And not to say that, all over the world we haven't had genocide, because many of the people in Europe have lost their language as well. They've lost their identity. And, this is something that we as a people, as a community, as the human race really need to deal with. And hopefully we'll bring ourselves back to that earth-based knowledge that says it's okay to be a child. It's okay to be a grandchild. The Sacred Seven, the book that I authored, The Path to the Wholeness of Self-Identity, is really about coming back to the earth-based wisdom. Knowing how to introduce yourself to the ayahuasca, knowing how to introduce yourself in Sweat Lodge, knowing how to create a formative force of self-identity. We struggle right now trying to find, where's the guidance at? But the guidance is really innately within us. It's woven into the fabric of our DNA. And when we activate ourselves as earthlings, Alex, man, power comes forward. I get excited when I think about your family, and I think about, Phoenix looking up from the glowing light of the campfire and introducing himself as you, introducing himself as your beloved, because you are a person and a man that takes responsibility for culture in your home and in your life. And I think that we need more men like that. We need more men to ask the big questions. Well, who am I? Who am I without behavior? Realize that again, like as a child, as a grandchild, as a person who is from the earth, right? Your foundation of fortified self-identity is not synonymous with your behavior. Instead, it's grounded into an earth-based technology. What does it mean to have a behavior-based self-identity? Hi, my name is Andrew and I'm an author. Hi, my name is Andrew and I'm a coach. Hi, my name is Andrew and I'm a keynote speaker. I'm a drummer. All of these things, these are behaviors, Alex. And for the men out there that are asking themselves through this conversation, and the ladies, again, I know that primarily your ministry is to men, and I go back to that, but I know there may be women that are listening as well. Having the courage to say, I'm in a safe space now with Man Tribe, and I can begin to ask myself those questions. When we ask ourselves those questions, it's the access point to defining ourselves through the customs of our ancestors, and how we show up in the world is a proven practice-based evidence. In the practice of the Sacred Seven, we begin to see the evidence in our lives. What is the evidence of a fortified self-identity? The evidence of a fortified self-identity is effortless integration. Effortless integration, the restoration of the natural journey. The natural journey is as simple as a spark touching a branch creates a fire. Rain falling to the ground creates a river. The river creates an ocean. This is how abundance happens. And when we get back to that natural journey of being a child, being a grandchild, being from the earth, fortified in a direction, right? We have an expanse available to us. The first thing that Google Maps asks you is, where are you at? Before you go on any journey of life, you need to first know where you're at. And the Sacred Seven gives us that honed in, grounded, fortified space. As I was sharing, growing up in the home that I grew up in, these ideas and concepts weren't accessible to me. And subsequently, I went down a road of destruction that led me into using heroin with my father. As a teenager, 18 years old, I'm sitting around a spoon, drawing up heroin and shooting dope with my dad. This was the reality of the container of the culture I was living in. And, I ended up in prison. I got a state number and a federal number. All of these things were prior to me coming into the Sacred Seven. Now, my life after the Sacred Seven, I've spoke at major mental health conferences. I'm a suicide survivor. I spoke for the largest suicide prevention event in the state of Arizona, the Out of the Darkness Walk. I presented at many mental health conferences and healthcare industry, worked with corporations. In 2019, we facilitated 587 wellness-based events, and also influential groups like Man Tribe that are out there doing the work, creating a container. Why is it that these organizations call on me? It's not because I got a PhD behind my name. It's because I know simply who I am. That simple access point to self-identity is powerful and profound. The first time I heard it, it was just like what you experienced. You said you felt a shift in the energy, and that's how it felt. I was, invited to the Navajo Nation right outside Fort Defiance to work in the hospital during a healing conference. And, I went to this healing conference. A man named Fillmore Bluehouse invited me back to his ceremonial hogan. While I was in the hogan, elders from the community came and introduced themselves from a traditional understanding of self-identity. And just like you, Alex, I felt the shift in the energetics of the room. And when I felt the shifts in the energetics of the room, I thought to myself, what is that? What are they talking about? What does it mean to know yourself as a child? What does it mean to know yourself as a grandchild? And that led me to, now over a decade later, producing the book, The Sacred Seven, the coaching platform based around self-identity, the coursework, and a community of people out there all dedicated to these ancient technologies.
Mm. Wow. There was a lot there, and the question that came to my mind when I was listening to you was, when the energetics of a room change, what's actually happening there? I know you're affirming your self-remembrance, you're affirming your ancestors, but how are the energetics of the room changing? What does that mean?
Man, that's such a huge question, and I got an answer for it. So, if you imagine, Alex, that we're holding a blanket, and all the people that are listening to this are holding this blanket, and each one of us, right, has a marble. Now, if I drop a bowling ball into the middle of that blanket, you remember parachute, right, when we were kids in PE? I know you do because your parents were PE teachers, right? Bouncing the ball on the parachute. Well, if you imagine that that's the fabric of reality, right? I throw a bowling ball into the middle of the fabric of reality. Now I've created a gravity inside of the fabric of reality. And each one of those marbles that we all drop are going to go to the density within the fabric of reality. So through the Sacred Seven, what happens is we fortify the metaphysical architecture, the energetic architecture of self-identity. And this is, again, a practice-based evidence. This is when you begin to learn how to introduce yourself. There are shifts in your reality from jump. I have had people that I've worked with tell me the first time they introduced themselves through the Sacred Seven, they were on the Golden Shore of California, Southern California, introduced themselves, and directly after that introduction, there was an earthquake. Myself, I have seen animals come out of the wilderness. I have, hummingbirds fly right in front of my face, because I use this as a practice for grounding and also a connective force to Mother Nature. If I'm in the wilderness, Alex, and I feel that awe of that connection to the earth, that many of us that have tuned into, the empathy to this beautiful planet, when we have that ability to connect, that's when I introduce myself. I say to the mountain, Dogate Andrew Ecker Yinishe. I pronounce myself to the earth. And that's that fortification of stepping back into the idea of all my relations. We learn this in spiritual community. It's a bumper sticker and a t-shirt now, but yet really what is the importance of that statement? All my relations. When we understand that we are a member of this reality, we are a part of the fabric that we're talking about, the woven, interdimensional, even fabric of reality. When we proclaim ourselves, man, it's like the
Mm.
mystic opens up. Not only is this a pragmatic approach to spirituality, like saying, okay, my greatest guides in life are my parents and my grandparents, and some of us resist that because we're like, hey, check it out. My dad was a junkie. My mom was a junkie. That bastard, drank himself to sleep every night. You fill in the blank, right? And in working with our men, I can tell you that tears come up the first time they introduce their dads as themselves, many of them.
Mm.
The first time they introduce their moms as themselves, tears. And why is that? Because we've created the confusion of the illusion that distances ourselves. We wonder why we're having broken relationships over and over again. Why we're masturbating all the time to get out of our head, why we're using alcohol, why we're using drugs, all of these things to escape reality, when yet inside of the sacred seven are the pieces to the puzzle that create balance. Create
Mm.
balance. When I call upon my name and I say, I am Andrew Ecker, I'm activating the sacred child within me. When I call upon my mom, I'm calling upon the divine feminine. When I call upon my father, I'm calling upon the divine masculine. Now, in their representation of their own behaviors as individuals, you could say, well, how could you see the divine in a mom that would use you to steal, use you to shoplift? Because that's what my mom's hustle was when she was out there using drugs. Well, inside of the container of my relationship to my mom, I learned so many blessings from her behavior. Just like the person who's listening here, and their mom was the helicopter mom that took them to baseball, that took them to soccer, that took them to football, that gave them every single thing in their life except maybe a non-judgmental space, right? That was pushing them and pushing them to be better, be more, be this, be that, rather than accepting. What's the brokenness that comes forward in your mom? Her own inadequacies that create that behavior that she pushes her child into the uncomfortable feelings of anxiety and performance-based, situational stress. These are the things that many of our people are dealing with. But yet, as you come to that place of recognizing the parental roles, the feminine, the masculine, you are now activating the sacred geometry of the Trinity. A formulated triangle is one of the strongest forms of sacred geometry, an equal triangle. This is what built the pyramids, Alex. So think about, how this represents in self. The natural journey, feminine, masculine, child, this is what creates reality, right? This is what formulates the world around us. Everything. The bear has a mama bear, a daddy bear, and a cub. The eagle has a little eaglet, a mama eagle and a daddy eagle. I mean, these are very pragmatic principles, but yet when they're applied to our lives, the metaphors just roll in and you start to see the world in a profound way.
Wow. How much does the language that you introduce yourself in have to do with the energy behind it? Because a lot of us are not native speakers. I know a lot about sound. I know there's certain energetic languages like Sanskrit and Hebrew and the indigenous languages. They have a lot of vowels. Is there any difference in the energy if I introduce myself and my ancestors as in English, which is the language of colonization, versus the Navajo or Dene that you use, Andrew?
Yeah, so I use actually it's Athabascan language. So in Navajo, I would say Yate, Andrew Ecker,
Mm.
Yinishe. In Apache or in the dialect that I speak, we say Dogate, Andrew Ecker, Yinishe. But they are very similar. And that's why when you pick up on it, you pick up on the Dene language because the majority of your friends speak Dene. I mean, Ron Interpreter, who is one of, the powerful mentors that are a part of this community, he speaks Diné and he introduces himself in that way. But yet it's the Athabascan language. Now, back to your question. For years of my life, when I first came into this technology, when I first came into the knowing of the Sacred Seven, I used English because that was, I just wanted to feel the experience of vibrationally connecting to the mystical power of ceremonial introduction. So in that practice, I can tell you that there were shifts, there were stumblings over it. There was like, okay, how do I do this? How do I utilize the feminine first, introduce myself, then my mom, then my dad, then my mom's mom, then my father's mother, then my mother's father, and finally my father's father. The structure of the feminine inside of the Sacred Seven is important because it brings us back to alignment, right, with the feminine side of who we are. This is represented in the Jewish community as well, and many tribal communities around the world that had a matriarchal system. How beautiful it would be if we could just take a breath as a man into the beauty of having a feminine leader in our lives. For me, right, having leadership from the feminine is a very beautiful thing because I get to rest. Just tell me what to do, mama. I'm here for you. That's how we find that power of the feminine leadership, right? The matriarchal. Now, as we begin to progress in the power of the Sacred Seven, the question comes forward. What would it be like if I introduced myself in Gaelic to the mountains in Ireland? I yearn to do this one day, and I've been studying bits of Gaelic so that when I go back to my European ancestral lands, I'm going to be able to introduce myself to the mountains in that vibrational frequency. As a contemporary person living in the United States, if you have a story of being Native American that many people have in their lives, it's okay for you to explore the ancestral language. It's also okay for you to explore the ancestral language of the place where you're living. If you're up in Paiute country, and you're participating, you're volunteering at a Paiute community center or a Paiute senior center or a daycare program, it's okay for you to learn how to introduce yourself in that indigenous language. In fact, the people of the land would honor you most of the time if you would learn to introduce yourself or integrate anything into your life that is cultural loving and cultural supporting. There's a big difference between that and culturally appropriating the ideas and the concepts within indigenous communities. I wouldn't show up at the cultural center or the senior center in a war bonnet, with a feather headdress on, right, wearing moccasins and your favorite costume that you ordered off of Amazon. That's inappropriate. But if you begin to learn the language and you begin to apply that as a point of respect and honor, it's okay. It's important to actually integrate that into our families because we're going to be the generation that someday when we enter into, the city of Los Angeles, it says, welcome to Los Angeles, the ancestral lands of the Tongva. When you go to Portland and it says, welcome to Portland, Oregon, the ancestral lands of the Willamette, the Clackamas, the Multnomah. These are things that we can begin to create as a people if we will tune in and listen and get outside of our ego of separation and say, hey, it's okay to honor the indigenous people of the land. It's one of the things that I feel we as a people can take control of. We can say, okay, I'm going to teach this. I'm going to show up in my life. The next man tribe event that you're at, saying, okay, we're going to do a land honoring at this event, and we're going to acknowledge the indigenous people of this land. We're going to take 5, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour to just put our offerings down here to the ancestors of the land. So these are ways that we can incorporate these very expansive teachings. And to answer your question, the language piece for me came forward because this was about me decolonizing my mind as, a person that has grown up with a story of being Apache in my family history. I have done the genealogy work, found where my family came from in Texas. We're actually Texas Apache, and my family was right around Fort Davis in the Madera Valley of Texas. And the Apaches of Texas are a very unique group of people because we have no reservation in Texas. The state of Texas has no reservations for the indigenous people of Texas, third largest state in the United States, and it has no reservations for its own indigenous people. Texas was really ground zero in the American Indian War. It was held by the Comanches and Apache auxiliaries for many years. In fact, you had to pay a tax to the Comanches if you came into Texas. Texas would still be, potentially a Native American empire if it wasn't for the soldiers of the South that were hardened veterans that went into Texas and then created the Texas Rangers. When the Texas Rangers were created and armed by the United States and also the Mexican government, this group of assassins began to kill more natives in the state of Texas, which led to my ancestors doing their best to survive. So when I came to the language, it was like, hey, I'm going to do something to decolonize my mind. I'm going to do something to decolonize who I am as a person. And I have a video on my YouTube channel. I'm up in where you're at right now in Oregon in the Umpqua National Forest. And it's got this this picture that says Voices of the Past. And it's got a picture of this Native American, kind of Neanderthal looking representation, looks like a caveman, and has, this, breechcloth on, and just really horrible representation of an indigenous person. And in the body of this sign in the Umpqua National Forest, it says the Athabascan language was spoke here. And on the video on YouTube, I'm taking a video of myself introducing, myself to the sign as a point of defiance to say, guess what? The Athabascan language is still spoke here. And, these are things that as an indigenous person, we come in contact with all the time. We have, a huge movement going on culturally. In my lifetime, I have seen the United States of America recognize LGBTQ people. I have seen the United States of America recognize immigrants. I have seen the United States of America continually recognize the atrocities that have happened to African American people, but yet we still have not have a conversation around what we've done with indigenous people, and specifically indigenous people that come from Spanish-speaking ancestry. In this country, 1954, there was an operation called Operation Wetback, and this is historical, where the United States government went in and gathered up Spanish-speaking Native Americans and sent them to Mexico. This is well documented. You can just Google it, Operation Wetback, and you'll see it. These are the strategies that the United States government has imposed upon the ancestry of Spanish-speaking Native Americans all over the Southwest, including California, including Colorado, Utah, the Four Corners area, all over this entire, Texas, everywhere. And, for me, right, learning the language was an act of defiance. It was an act of rebellion. And does it feel good to introduce myself in the traditional language? Yes, it does. It feels empowering, and I would also share with the audience, the listeners, learn your ancestral language, Think about what it would be like if you went back to your European ancestry and you got to introduce yourself to the lake in Europe where your ancestors came from, the mountains in Europe. It's a beautiful thing to think about that, because just like you said, all languages have vibrational frequency. And also the thing about English that makes it so beautiful is you can begin to speak like an indigenous person with English. You can use, and what I mean by that is, some of my Hopi relatives have brought it to my attention that in the Hopi language, the idea of rain is just, it's just rain. It's not it rained. It's not it's raining. It's not it did rain, in the past tense. And if you begin to eliminate the past tense from your language at times, when it's, you can apply it, you can begin to step into that eternal vibrational frequency that is available to language.
Mm.
You notice when I introduce my mom, I say my mom's name. I don't say my mom was. I don't say my dad was. I don't say my grandpa was. And these are just little kind of, I guess, tweaks, little corrections that you can make to your language that can actually bring more power to the frequency that you develop in your own ceremonial introduction.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in what you mentioned, and the things that I'd like to circle back with are cultural appropriation. I want to throw in white guilt, and I want to throw in also the racism that's occurring and has been occurring for very long, and has also not been acknowledged, in a lot of ways as well. One of the things that I wanted to ask you is, what would you say to the average white American, somebody listening who doesn't know their ancestral culture, who doesn't know their lineage, and finds, let's say, they find truth in the indigenous ways. They find connection through the ways of other cultures, and they might, where is that line of, okay, well, you got introduced to the earth and to a deep level of yourself through an indigenous culture. At what point do you shift and start to go deeper and acknowledge your own culture? What does that look like from your perspective?
So you can begin if you don't know if your grandma was Irish, if your grandpa was German, or any of those things, as an American, you can identify them with the lands that they were born from. So let's say that you don't know if your family was German, Irish, Swiss, or whatever, but your mom was born in Delaware, and she was born in a city in Delaware. Well, you can introduce your grandma from that place of identity and connection to the earth. There has to be a time in our evolution as citizens of this land in North America where we begin to identify with the land. When we talk about like the idea that Native Americans died for the land, we think usually, at least in my mind, prior to learning the ceremonial practices of many indigenous cultures, I think, oh, well, you mean they died for their farms, their hunting grounds, they died for, maybe their burial grounds, those kind of things. And when I heard that the umbilical cords were buried in the land, that from the very moment that you were born, your parents took your umbilical cord, did a ceremony around it, and then buried it into the earth. It brought me to a different perception of what it means to be associated with the land, what it means to be connected to the earth. And I feel as a contemporary culture, we can begin to harness some of these cultural understandings and also earth-based wisdoms into our life. I mean, what would it be like if they opened up the national park and they said, okay, these national parks are protected, and on the first Monday of the month, we're going to do a ceremony for all the parents to come out and bury their child's umbilical cord into the mountains? What would that be like for us as contemporary people? How would we connect to the earth? How would we begin to design a relationship to the mountain? Because right now, the way the contemporary system has created our connection to the earth is you need to walk on this trail. Don't step off the trail, because you, first of all, are not a natural being. You're not an earthling. The deer can go over there and go to the bathroom. Your dog can go over there and go to the bathroom. But you as a human being, you need to go to the bathroom in that, porta potty, in that, bathroom over there. And don't step off the trail, because you're going to damage the earth. This is how we have systematically created ideas and concepts in our minds that we are not of the earth, that we don't have a connection to the earth. So all people are indigenous to this planet. And when you begin to hone in to your ceremonial introduction and you say, my grandmother was from New Mexico, right? My grandfather was from Arkansas. My father's mother was from Pennsylvania. And you start to implement that into your own identity, you'll start to understand what it means like to be connected to this earth in a deeper way. So that's one strategy that you can begin to formulate a self-identity that's based around the structure of indigenous knowing, earth-based wisdom. To the idea of cultural appropriation is something that's very sensitive. And, many people that are involved in this conversation feel that their culture is being threatened by another individual taking from their culture. And this is important because if you're hurting a person in the way that you conduct yourself, then we all need to do our best to navigate and to not cause harm. What is important about cultural appropriation? Conversations like mascots. To name a baseball team after a group of people, a football team after a group of people, and to show like these, like if it was a black person, right, that was up there as a mascot, people would be enraged. There's no way that that would happen. Dr. Seuss books that have pictures of Asian people in them are taken off the shelves right now. But yet we still have, mascots out there that are depictions of Native American people. That for me is crossing a line. You as a European American person or a person of, European descent wearing a war bonnet, a Lakota war bonnet that wasn't given to you by a Lakota or wasn't given to you by an indigenous person, that for me is disrespectful. The idea of you learning the traditions of a culture, participating in sweat lodge, participating in ceremony, these things are cultural honoring for me. Now some people will say that that's cultural appropriation as well. But for me, as a person, individual person, now I don't speak for all indigenous people, at all. And don't get me twisted in that. I'm speaking for myself here. When you as an individual have a honest desire to learn the traditions and to learn the pan-tribal traditions, not one tribe can say that they own sweat lodge. Not one tribe can say that they own the medicine wheel. Not one tribe can say that they own a fire ceremony. Not one tribe can say they own a water ceremony. These are ceremonies that have been done by multiple tribes all around the world. So we do our best in our contemporary culture to activate a ceremonial space where all people can find healing, where all people can come in and learn from the medicine wheel, learn from the sweat lodge, learn from the water ceremony, the fire ceremony. These things can be applicable to your life in a ceremonial way that brings nothing but honor to yourself, your family, and the indigenous people of the land. Again, it goes back to that acknowledgement and that point of restoration. Are you restoring the voice of indigenous people in your contemporary life? Are you holding honor for them? Have you ever thought about volunteering at a Native American senior center or volunteering at a reservation and saying, hey, I just want to support the people here, taking the time to call up the res and saying, hey, if you ever have any volunteer hours, I'm available. Here's my phone number. Here's my email. These are the things that I started to do in my life. I volunteered at NASA, which was Native American Senior Center Association. I volunteered with the Tohono O'odham. I volunteered with many different groups around the community, even at Patina Wellness Center, Native American Connections. I made myself available for the indigenous people here in Phoenix. And in doing that, right, I started to get blessed in my own life. I started to learn more about how to conduct myself. I didn't know how to go into sweat lodge. I remember one time I was in sweat and I was yelling, because I was so excited. And this Dene brother, he like poked me in the side and he was like, hey man, I can't hear myself think, keep it down. You're scaring the spirits here. And, those types of corrections, for a lot of people, they would say, oh, well, F that guy, I'm out of here. I'm never coming back. He's all in his ego and everything else. But that's not me, What I did was I took my ego, my defensiveness, and I set it to the side. And I said, I'm here to learn, Thank you, brother. And I remember one time I was in there and one of my relatives, Leroy Begay, this elder, I had done something really, kind of what I thought was trivial. I think I put the the sticks that you use for moving the stones around, I think I took them out like in, way early or something like that. And I thought it was trivial, but the elder that was in there seeing me do this and just went on and on and on. It was like every little thing that I had done wrong. And Leroy leaned over and he whispered in my ear and he said, they're saying that not to you. They're saying that to everybody, but you're the one that's strong enough to hear it. Don't take it personal. And these were teachings that came to me and started to get me back into the tribal mentality. It's very different. The individual idea of self, the distortion of the confusion that's in our contemporary culture that says be an individual, be a leader, you have to be a leader in this world or you're not going to be anything. These are contrary ideas to tribal mentality. Tribal mentality is about the whole. It's about the next 7 generations. It's about the group, the community, and you're one piece of that whole. You're one of the relatives that's there. But if you are, a vehicle that an elder can teach through, then be that vehicle. Be the witness for the people around you. This is how we show up in a different mindset. We get back to community. It said when we sit in circle together, we leave as a family. Just the act of sitting in circle. But what does this contemporary culture give us? The line, right? Every single one of us that goes to school, we sit in a line. We go to church, we sit in a line, go to synagogue, go to mosque. All of these vehicles of spirituality, except, our indigenous rooted, powerful earth-based wisdom, are all about leadership. Why is the Native American tradition so empowering? Because it's about community. It's about, the circle, even circular thinking, like learning to think in the way of the seasons. Reminding yourself that your emotions are like the seasons. They're going to go in a cycle.
Yeah. As a New Yorker, I can relate to that linear way of thinking because New York is built on city blocks and everything is just angular and right angles. And the whole city is structured in a masculine way. And when I left New York, I had an awakening of sorts. It was a circular, even much more feminine energy in California and the West Coast, and just immediately became more connected to the earth upon having more physical space around me, just to orient myself. So I absolutely understand. And this conversation is incredible. I love what you're sharing. I would love to do a part 2 with you, but I'm feeling called. Maybe we can close. And I wanted to just ask you one more thing: is what's your vision for the world moving forward? And maybe we could just close with a prayer.
Oh, that sounds great. So the space that I hold is the process of production for the means of restoration, producing to restore people, families, community, and the planet. The vision that the creator has given me is that we got gardens on the outside of the bank buildings at every downtown. We're vertically farming so that we can turn the mono-agricultural system back into the wildlands. And we'll see the restoration of the buffalo, the elk, the deer, the wolf. If you imagine the San Joaquin Valley turning back into what it was prior to European contact, which the natives said that it was fox underfoot, Alex. Think about that. Walking through the San Joaquin Valley and you literally step on a wild animal every step. That's what they meant by fox underfoot. That it was so lush and so green and so beautiful. Now you look at it, right, and you think, what? It was all oak tree. It was all beautiful back then. This is something that we can strive for once we begin to utilize technology in a way that is about restoration rather than simple consumption. Right now, what we're doing is producing to consume, and we're consuming people, families, community, and the planet at a rate that is astronomical. So getting back to the memory of knowing that you inherently inside of you are perfect and beautiful just the way you are, and there is a design, right? Imagine the city that you're living in being a vertical farm. Imagine, hold it in your hand and throw that energetic design at the city of Portland. Throw it at the city of Phoenix. Hold that vision in your heart. And we will one day go out to our cars, turn them on, and we'll forget the memory of them burning fossil fuels. Everything will be different. We're at the pinnacle of that right now. This is coming into alignment faster than I believe we even know. because the forces in the unseen, the forces in the seen are all collaborating, on our benefit. This is an evolutionary moment in consciousness, and it's a huge time and a great time to be alive. As far as prayer, man, you want me to pray for 2 minutes, dude? We only got two. Come on, Alex, you prayed with me too many times to know that you don't turn the ball over to me with 2 minutes left. All right, we'll do a quick one.
5 minutes.
But this dude knows how I pray.
I don't have a 3:30, so we're
Hey, all right, let's do it then. So I'll put some medicine down here. I got this altar going too, by the way, for everybody. If you haven't seen this yet, it's been burning the whole time for us right here. I got some cedar and some sage on this, so we'll go ahead and bring ourselves into that prayer place. And I do love to pray, so we'll do a little nice prayer here. And thank you, Alex, for having me on here. I feel very blessed to be a part of this community, to be connected with Man Tribe. And I just feel like, man, good things are happening, brother. So, yeah, I feel very, very blessed. And you and your family, dude, you guys are in my hearts, on my prayer, on my altar, love you guys. So yeah, so we'll pray right now. So Father, Mother, Creator, Source, we thank you for this opportunity to be in this prayer place that was founded before the creation of time. We thank you for the above place, the below place, the inside place, east, south, west, and north, and all the holy people that are there. We thank you for the Gan, the Kachina, the Yebache, the holy angel light beings of the land of Oregon, where my brother is at, and also all the angel light beings of this land, the land of the Akma Atam. I thank you, Creator, that before the foundations of the earth, you gave us this meeting place, and you also called the people from the four winds, the east, the south, the west, the north, to be here to listen, to open up their hearts, to listen to this conversation, Creator. It's a story that changes people, and we know as your Holy Spirit inspires us to live life, to be in the place of abundance, that we are seeing the miracle of what it means to be restored. And I pray that you would send forth a wave upon the earth of restoration, that we would see our families restored, you would see our communities restored, and even our planet. We thank you for clean air, clean water, clean earth, and clean fire. We thank you for the animal people and all of our relations. And I thank you for the heart of a man. And I pray, Creator, that you would work in the seen and unseen parts of the men that have listened here tonight, and that you would devour the suicidal ideation, you would devour the addiction, that you would devour the separation from the authenticity, vulnerability, and intimacy that brings us into that place of divine abundance. And I release that upon the earth now, knowing that you have worked in the seen and unseen parts. Beauty above, beauty below, beauty beside, beauty in front, beauty behind, beauty within. We are made beautiful again. Aho and amen.
Aho and amen.
Beautiful, brother. Well, hey, I love you, bro. And thank you for having me on here. And I only went a minute over, so that's not too bad.
How can people find you? How can people support you, Andrew?
Sweet. So if this airs before April 13th, we will be at the Tico Time RV Resort in northern New Mexico, south of Durango, for the Tico Time Reggae Fest. So we'll be out there drumming and sharing Sacred Fire, an alcohol-free zone at this music festival. So if you'd like to come out and hang out with us, please come. We'll have drums for all the kids and all the people, and I'll be sharing the Sacred Seven. If you want to connect with me online, come through and check out Drumming Sounds, check out Sacred Seven. These are all the places where I'm at. You can get to thesacred7.com for a free copy of my book. I send out a PDF copy. If you'd like to join with me in our ministry, every signed copy of the book, which I channel a personal message from the Great Spirit, from the Holy Spirit for you. And then if you purchase that signed copy, I send a book into the institution. We're partnered with the Arizona Department of Corrections, and we've been able to send, over 100 books in so far. So, let's keep it going. And really a blessing to everybody out there. I thank you so much, bro, for giving me the opportunity to talk here. And yeah, I don't think that you really got, I mean, I don't think I took too many deep breaths the whole time because these questions that you asked me, man, is like, really took me to a great place. So thank you for being a great interviewer. And, I'm excited to see where this podcast goes. And we need part two as soon as possible.
Yes, sir. All right, Andrew. Thank
Let's
you.
talk about some drumming next time, huh?
Let's go. We'll bring the drum right on here. Let's
That's
do it.
rad. All right.
Thank you.